on NBC. And if you know him from that, that's fine. And if you know him as Blake Carrington on Dynasty, that's one thing, or the voice on Charlie's Angels. And we may get to all that, but there are some things about John Forsyth I'm guessing most of you don't know. And let's go way back to your days in the late 1930s as the PA announcer, I guess,
yes,
at Ebbets Field,
yes,
the Brooklyn Dodgers.
I was in my junior year in North Carolina, and I got an opportunity through a fellow that I knew in New York who was a friend of Larry McPhail's, who just moved to the Dodgers. And they were looking for a public address announcer. Me being a baseball nut, knowing everybody's statistics, mother's name, shoe size, uncle's name, and crazy about baseball, they didn't have to offer me a lot of money to lure me away from school. And as a result of that, I fell into quite a remarkable kind of job. Red Barber had just come from Cincinnati with McPhail at that point, and he didn't want to do any of the exotic field things that they had on the show. They were not doing well at the gate, so they'd have Jesse Owens racing a thoroughbred racehorse around the bases before 35 or 40,000 people. Babe Didrikson hitting 9 irons from home plate into a fireman's net in center field. And Red Barber, quite rightly, didn't want to do it, so it fell to me. And it was wonderful, you know, for a 19-year-old kid in front of all those people to have to describe that kind of stuff and make it interesting, because sometimes it was not interesting.
Now, here's something that's going to surprise people, because they take a look at you, and although I guess I can say it, you're 74 years old.
I'm not going to tell you. A lot of women take me for 50. The other night, one took me for 100. So,
but you know, ladies and gentlemen, so for a guy who looks as youthful as you, it seems strange to say, but you knew Babe Ruth, or at least you met him, right?
Yes, I did.
He was a coach with the Dodgers after he finished playing.
That's right. He had always had a secret yen to be a manager. And he was hoping, I'm sure, because he never said anything to me about it, but I'm sure he was hoping to be the manager of the Yankees. The Yankees would have no part of that. And he went to Pittsburgh, and he went to Boston. And finally, in 1938, with Burley Grimes, who was the manager there, teetering on the brink of losing his job, I think they convinced him that he had a shot at being the manager of the Dodgers. And so he came as the coach of the team. Remarkable state of affairs, you know. Leo DeRocha was the shortstop, and Leo was domineering and aggressive and exciting ball player, and he too wanted to be the manager of the Dodgers, so there was a real conflict between the two. And
they had been roommates at one time with the Yankees.
Right.
DeRocha eventually did become the manager of the Dodgers.
That's right, he did. There was also some, now that Leo is gone, and of course Babe died in 1948 or something, I think. Babe was a real hostile guy when it came to DeRocha, because he accused him of stealing his watch and stealing his wallet when DeRocha played on the same team with Babe Ruth in 1927. So there was a real hostility between them, which ended up in a big fight underneath right outside the Dodgers dressing room, right underneath the stands at Ebbets Field.
DeRocha must have been giving away 75 pounds.
Yeah, but he was tough. He knew how to handle himself. He was a great pool shooter. He was a great, graceful and wonderful athlete. And apparently he knew how to duke it out, because I think I didn't see the fight, but the consensus of opinion was that he had won the fight.
Didn't I read somewhere that you overheard the Babe telling these raunchy stories about his exploits?
That was one of the most heartbreaking days of my life. You know, 19 years old, baseball freak and nut that I was, to hear, I didn't even think for one that baseball players went out with girls and they smoked cigarettes and all that kind of, I wouldn't believe that.
Certainly not. Up at 6, some brief calisthenics, you know, to kind of brace the body, and then some Ovaltine maybe. Right,
and go to the Christian Science reading room afterward and bone up on the Daily News and all. To be sitting down on the corner of the Dodgers bench the day that Babe Ruth came to the Dodgers, was a remarkable thing because, you know, ball players, they're always chattering, talking, kidding around, making jokes and whatever. There was silence. And this great man came out of the, from up out of the path from the dressing room, and everybody just kind of stood and looked and listened. And me above all, I was all ears at what was going to be said down on the other end. Whereupon he began to talk about how baseball had changed in this great rumbly voice and this legend that sat there.
Yeah.
Baseball, he said, was not like it used to be. He said, 1927, when he hit 60 home runs, he said he had 30, 40 hot dogs a day, used to drink a fifth of whiskey, and my eyes got wider and wider, and all the ball players too, you know, because they may not have gone to the reading room, and they may not have been the choir boys that I thought that they were, but nobody drank that kind of booze, and nobody ate the number of hot dogs, and all my castles that I had built came crumbling down as I was listening to this.
But no one obviously had a constitution like this guy. Nobody could be built like him and play like he did. Nobody could consume and carouse and abuse the body and go out and perform like that, so none of the rules applied to him.
My feeling is that he would not have been as good if he hadn't had those hot dogs and that amount of booze.
Probably not.
Right.
I mean, his body required unique nourishment.
Right. Of which he partook of plenty.
So now you're a young man, early 20s. When does the acting bug bite, and how do you get into it?
Well, baseball is I was with the Dodgers for 3 years. Baseball is a highly, that seasonal occupation. It's summertime, spring, summer, and somewhat into the fall. And the rest of the year is winter. And I love to eat in the winter, and I wondered what the devil was I going to do. I thought of becoming a writer when I was in school. I was an English major. I don't think I was quite good enough. I thought of becoming a sports announcer, a play-by-play man. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I was quite good enough for that. So I decided that maybe I'd try radio acting, which is somewhat akin to what I was doing on the public address announcing system. And also, too, I'd gained a great deal of poise and experience having done those exotic descriptions that I did.
Yeah.
I went to a friend of mine who put me in touch with a man who was doing radio work, and he said, of course, he said, I'd be happy to have you audition. And I said, oh, that's grateful to you for that. I said, what is an audition? He said, it's something you do, you choose some material and you come and do it and act it, and he said, I'll let you know whether you can do radio or not. Well, I puzzled over what I could possibly do, remembering things that I had studied in school, like Cyrano de Bergerac, Eugene O'Neill, play of Eugene O'Neill. With all the great wisdom of a 19, 20-year-old, decided to go with Cyrano de Bergerac, which was my first mistake. And not having any talent for acting, not having done it, there I was in front of a microphone doing this soliloquy, this great, great soliloquy. And when I was finished, there was a long pause, maybe a minute. And finally, this fellow, Ted Cott, he said, John, he said, you got a minute? I said, yeah, sure. He said, let's go have a cup of coffee. That sounded ominous enough. But when he took me down, he said, you know, you got a good voice. He said, you like baseball, don't you? I said, yeah, I love it. He said, you think you have a future in it? I said, I don't know. He said, I think you should stick with it. And I said, what, that bad? He said, not only that bad, you don't have any talent whatsoever. He said, I've had 10, 15 years in radio. I've heard thousands of auditions. That is the worst I'd ever heard. He said, I'm telling it to you softly. And I said, So, thank you very much. And I thanked him and left. And I walked home. I was living uptown with 3 other guys. And I walked home, and as I was walking home, I got angrier and angrier. I said, damn, that's not right. I said, I have no training. I have no nothing. You can't assess whatever I did in the light of thousands of other guys who do have some background. He shouldn't have done that. Maybe I am that bad, but let me try it. Yeah, John, why don't you try it? So talked myself into studying with somebody. And then I got to like it. So I went out with a Shakespearean company. I went out with a children's theater company. I drove a truck. I put up the scenery, all those kind of things, and really got involved in it. And I think, and Ted Cott, who was a lovely, lovely guy, first time I got starred on Broadway, it was 1950, 51, when I replaced Hank Fonda in Mr. Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
He came backstage and said, see, I told you you couldn't act.
People used to refer to you as a younger Henry Fonda. They saw similarities between you and Fonda, at least in the 1950s, right?
Yeah, I think it was a ridiculous comparison, really, because we may have had some similarity in features, or maybe because I'm tall and loose-limbed or whatever, and he was tall and loose-limbed. But he was a great, great actor, and he was an extraordinary guy, and he was much more country boy than I am. I think I was much more citified, if there is such a word, than Hank was. We got to be good friends after a while, but he was kind of like a big brother to me.
We were looking back over some of the research, and the legendary theater critic, the old-time theater critic Brooks Atkinson, really lauded your performance in Tea House of the August Moon.
Yeah.
Now, again, people sit here and they see Blake Carrington or whatever, and that's a certain kind of performance. But my point is that this goes back some 40 years. That was a real credential as a stage performer.
Yes, it was. And it was the first show that I had done and been starred on Broadway that I had created. That was a big feather in my cap, and it meant a good deal to me, too. Because, as I said, I was overly sensitive to the fact that that Hank Fonda had preceded me in that. Tea House of the August Moon was a very, very big success. We played it. I played it for about 3.5 years, and it went on for another 1.5 years after I played it.
Now, you closely observed Fonda. You were part of the original Actors Studio with people like Brando and Montgomery Clift. I guess Patricia Neal was in there,
yes.
and Carl Malden. The list goes on.
Eli Wallach.
Yes. And yet I've seen you quoted as saying, I wasn't touched by the hand of God in terms of talent. I'm a good actor, know my craft, give my best effort, but I have no jealousy of those who have greater talent. I stand back and admire it.
Yes.
Was that an accurate quote, or does it sum up how you feel?
No, that's largely the way I felt. Some of us are journeymen. Some do have that inordinate talent that enables them to lift ordinary commonplace theater to very, very high levels. And others of us do good work and hard work and try, but don't have that extraordinary thing. Marlon Brando, the first time I saw him was at the studio. He had the quality that you observe when you look at an animal in the zoo, an ape of some kind, that looks right at you, you know, unself-consciously looks at you. It's extraordinary because it's so compelling.
They say some people have more money than they know.
For girl steals boy, huh? Well, that's more than Crowley makes for abusing us one whole year. How about Julian, what's his name? Does he go too?
I'm afraid not. The studio just wanted me. Well, it's $250 a week from now on, starting a week from Wednesday.
America, God shed his grace.
Now, when we talk about the early days of TV, I'm not talking in this case about Bachelor Father in the late 1950s. I'm talking about the 40s and one of the very first commercial television shows ever done.
Yes, it was a show on NBC. It took place down on the 6th floor here. What they did was they took a radio studio and put about 15 sets in it. We did a play called Miracle in the Rain, written by Ben Hecht, about a soldier meeting a girl and somebody else. There were about, at that point, there may have been 10 or 15 television sets, public television sets in the whole of New York. And my mother, who was loved drama, loved theater, and loved me, wanted to see the show. And I said, well, Mom, I really don't know where you could see it. There's just no place. I mean, they have a control room and they have a tiny little studio. And she said, well, there must be sets in New York. I said, I don't know. I'll find out. They said that on 3rd Avenue, there were about 7 or 8 saloons that had them, where guys used to watch the wrestling for most part, and Dumont shows that they had Steve Allen on the show. And she said, well, that's where I'm going to go. I said, you're going to go into the saloon and watch it? She said, yes, indeed, I am. I said, oh. Okay, but be careful, huh? And the night that went on, she waltzed in and sat down. She said, the bartender said, what would you like to have? She said, well, the first thing I would like to do, before I order anything, is I'd like very much to turn off the wrestling, and would you mind, all you nice gentlemen, turn the... And there's the middle of a big bout with guys pulling, tugging. He said, "Hey, lady, this is good stuff, lady." And she said, "Yes, but my son is coming on the air. He's going to be on a show on NBC, a good dramatic show." And they said, "Well," they said, "Oh, all right. We'll see if we like it." And so they turned it on. And she ordered, she wasn't a drinker or anything, she ordered a Manhattan, which she sipped at for the hour duration. And the guys, they were watching the show. And she said, and pretty soon the whole bunch, including the bartender, not bothering to serve, wait, everybody, they were all watching the show. And when it was all finished, they said, "Hey, lady, hey, that's a good show. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, we did better than the wrestling." And television at that time was a different bag entirely. It was very experimental. We did it on kinescope. There was no tape. So you couldn't stop. And that brought about some interesting things as well for the actors.
What's the biggest screw-up that you had to just smooth over and keep on going?
Biggest screw-up for me was I was playing a baseball player in one of the things, I believe it was on the Philco Playhouse, and I had to change and get from a baseball uniform into a dinner jacket, and there must have been about 1 minute's time. So as soon as I got off camera, there were 2 or 3 people helping me, catching the things. I threw them to them, and bringing pants for me to get into and shoes for me to get into, and I didn't make it. It was 1 minute, and here I was supposed to be in the center of this suave bunch and be suave myself, and I didn't have the dinner jacket on. And I knew that I had to say something, I had to ad-lib something, and I said, well, gosh, it was awful hot in here, wasn't it? It's getting cooler now. I think I'll put my coat on. Great line, you know, wonderfully colorful, interesting, fascinating, no cowardice kind of line. But it served its purpose, and it was something that I had thought about. I said, if I'm not going to make it, I have to have something to say. So it enabled me to do that. But other actors were caught when they were supposed to have been killed. They were caught, you know, in a crumpled death position, and then they'd wake up, and the camera would be on them. It had not gone off, and they'd get up, and then they'd fall back again.
Well, it's just a spasm.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of an involuntary thing. They're clinically dead, but they just have a spasm, that's all.
Yes, there were a lot of spasms.
So I saw...
John Forsyth is back to talk about a bunch of other stuff. See you later. Conversation with John Forsyth, decided to carry it over into another program, but we're going to begin here with Bachelor Father, which was the late 1950s program where you played the playboy Bentley Gregg, and your niece comes to live with you. Her parents have died, and you're in charge of this 13, 14-year-old girl. An interesting aspect of this was it was on all three networks, not simultaneously, but at one time or another, CBS, NBC, ABC.
Yes, I think it's unique because of that. I'm not sure that it's a really complimentary thing, because I think we were shunted from one network to another in the 5.5 years that we were on. They had different system then. The hour belonged not to the network, but it belonged to a sponsor who would take it over. Paul Hahn from the American Tobacco Company had an hour on, I think we opened on, we opened on CBS. And that hour belonged to the American Tobacco Company. And they put what they wanted put in there. For example, we shared the hour for one whole year with Jack Benny. Or maybe it was 2 years, I can't remember, but it was so long ago. That's because both those shows were owned by the American Tobacco Company. And wherever American Tobacco moved, we moved with them. And of course, it was a confusing thing working, our being on one week with Jack Benny, he being on the next week. But it enabled me to have him on my show occasionally. I think he was on once or twice, and it was a great treat to have him on the show, of course.
Do you compute your legal fees like other lawyers do?
Well, yes, Jack. I keep a log on the time that I spend with a client, and then I base my fees according to that.
Oh, I see. That you mean that if a client comes in and just talks socially, just a chat, I mean, you don't count that?
No, just the time actually consumed in business.
Well, what's new, Bentley?
Now, that was something that in the early days of television would happen from time to time, and almost all these sitcoms were set in sort of an unspecified Midwestern location, some town called Springdale or Midville or something like that, in a suburban situation. But then a really famous person would drop by and just happen to be...
In Springdale.
Right, in Springdale. Just happened to be Bentley Gregg's pal, or just happened to be the Dr. Stone's friend on the Donna Reed show. So, you know, there would be the Carl Peterson kid on the Donna Reed show playing catch with Willie Mays. Willie just happened to be in town. Jack Benny just happened to drop by to say hello to his friend Bentley Gregg.
That's funny, but it's true. I guess you discount those kind of things. But when you see people of that kind of eminence come on the show, you don't connect it up with the kind of ridiculous phoniness of the circumstances that supposedly surrounded it.
The guy who played your housekeeper was an actor named Sammy Tong.
Yes.
And in the show, his name was Peter Tong.
Yes.
Why couldn't he just be Sammy Tong?
When we redo it...
Boy, there's a hard-hitting question. You think we're not getting to the bottom of stuff that concerns you, Mr. and Mrs. America?
You sure know how to get to a guy. The real distinction about Sammy Tong was that we hold that as a very, very important part of a great change in television, because we were the first ones to use an Asian in a comedy part. You all been Japanese aviators, you know, who peered over the side and dropped bombs, or they were detectives. But to make him into a comic, and he was a wonderful, wonderful comic on our show, was an innovative thing. The other thing was that we were the first show that had the one parent kind of situation. So I was torn between having all those beautiful young ladies in my house and having a 13-year-old and had to attend to her problems as well. That brought about one very interesting condition. I would have the young ladies in the house, and I would wine and dine them, and there would be some kind of romantic arrangement, hopefully. But the girl's bedroom was right about where that door was, about 6 feet away. And all at once, we decided, you know, that's perilously close to this kind of activity. To have this 13-year-old, we have to do something about it. So we had to change, rebuild the whole house, or move. So we decided to move to another house.
So in the plot line of the show, they moved?
Yes, yes, we did. And all because of the sensitivity of having this little 13-year-old within earshot of what was going on.
So they built like a carriage house to put her in? This guy, Bentley Gregg, as I remember, was having a good time.
He was a swinger. and among the beautiful ladies that I had in the house, people like Barbara Eden and Mary Tyler Moore. Yeah. And, of course, we had a number of stars that we introduced in the show, one of them being Ryan O'Neal, Jimmy Boyd. We had a pretty good record for that. And, of course, a tall, slender, lovely lady that you may have admired at some time in your life, Linda Evans. She was a 15-year-old, and she came in, and since I owned a piece of the show, I used to sit in on some of the casting sessions, because it was interesting, too, sitting in on the casting session with all those lovely ladies. And Linda came in. She was knobby-kneed, skinny, tall, little 15-year-old, but she had remnants, and you could see the fact that she was going to grow into quite a remarkable-looking girl. She was grossly underdeveloped, but I thought she was so pretty, and she was going to play a girl who was a friend of my niece's who had a crush on me. And that's how Linda and I met.
Thank you. When you're finished with your work, I could take you for a ride in the speedboat. Do you water ski?
Well, I tried it once, but I sprained my knee. I'm afraid I'm a little too old for that sort of thing.
Oh, you're not even in the prime of life yet. I read where that's 40. You're a long way from 40.
Not as long as you think.
Besides, I like older men, especially older men with some distinction. You have distinction.
Subsequently, many, many years later, when I'd been signed to do Dynasty, and there was a party, and they brought her over to meet me, and I said, Linda Evans, my, how you've grown. And she never forgot.
And you had not seen her or talked to her in all those many years?
In all the 25 years. She's playing a girl, a friend of my niece's, and now playing my wife. It was quite a remarkable switch.
Did you play Blake Carrington pretty much tongue-in-cheek?
No. I patterned him after Lou Wasserman, a guy that I have great admiration for. As you know, the head of MCA, who has been a close friend of mine and a big benefactor of mine all my life, who was a man of tremendous integrity, very tough about business, murderously firm in his office, but very warm and loving and attentive to his family and his friends. So I pretty much patterned it after him.
But you didn't see it in some way as kind of high camp, this primetime soap?
No, there was enough high camp going on with Joan Collins and Alexis, you know. I played it pretty straight. And as a matter of fact, I was determined to show the audience, and I think I convinced the producers finally after a long time, that this was a man who was a collector of things. He collected companies, football teams, oil wells, everything. But the biggest jewel in his collection was his wife, was Linda Evans. And he didn't want any other women. That's not what he wanted. He wanted the things that a powerful man like that feels added power with, which was the companies and the enterprises that he could put together. Because they wanted me to be involved with other women at various times. And some of them were very, very attractive, too, like Ally McGraw was one. But I resisted that, and I think, in part, that was part of the strength of the show, that you felt that at the core of the show here's this couple who cared a great deal for each other.
In The Trouble with Harry.
Yes.
Shirley MacLaine was in that?
Shirley MacLaine was her first picture.
You're beautiful. Wonderful. You're the most wonderful, beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'd like to paint you.
Was there something else you wanted, Mr. Marlowe, isn't it?
You certainly are a lovely woman. I'd like to paint you nude.
Some other time, Mr. Marlowe. I was about to make Arnie some lemonade.
Oh, yes, yes, of course. Perhaps I've come at an awkward moment.
You want to undress me? You have.
Hitchcock, amazing, extraordinary man. The man who was in charge of everything. He would sit, he always wore a dark suit, black tie, and a white shirt. He could be in the jungle, and he would still wear the same. He once told me that he only had same color, blue, very dark blue suit and white shirts. He said he had a flat in New York, and he had some kind of a flat in London. And he said, but they were all the same suits. But they were marked, and one was slim, one was not so slim, one was fat. They're all the same suits in different kind of sizes to fit his proportions for the moment. But he was a remarkable man. He was funny, he was droll, he was an interesting guy. Knew everything that was going on the set. Everybody's job, perhaps better than they knew it. I must tell you one further Hitchcock story, even if you cut it, because it may be a little wrong.
Cut one of your stories, John?
You may have to, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. He said he was making a picture called Lifeboat, and he said the cameraman on the picture, he said, was a very, very fussy, touchy fellow. And it all took place in a lifeboat about 15 feet long, and they had numerous characters in the lifeboat. Never got out of the lifeboat. And one of the characters in it was a woman acted by Tallulah Bankhead, who was one of the great women of the American theater, but a little on the wild lunatic side. The cameraman came up to him one day as he was sitting in the chair, and he said, yes, what's the problem? And the cameraman said, did you see the dailies? Dailies being yesterday's work. He said, no, I haven't seen the dailies. What's the matter? He said, well, it's Miss Bankhead. He said, Miss Bankhead, he said, I don't know what we're going to do, Mr. Hitchcock. He said, easy now, easy. What's the problem? He said, well, he said, you know, I got the camera down high, I got it low, I'm trying to get a variety of different shots. He said, and when I'm down low like this and the shooter, he said, she doesn't wear any pants. And he said, when I'm down low like this, he said, it's a big problem. He said, you can see everything. Hitchcock said, oh. He said, well, I don't know rightly whether this is a problem for wardrobe, makeup or hairdressing.
Well, congratulations to you. Good night. General Electric, they're all asleep over there. So I assume they haven't cut the power, at least not intentionally. So we're still on the air. Which brings us to In Cold Blood. And my own blood ran cold a short time ago, as a matter of fact. But the Truman Capote classic made into a film, and you play the detective who tracks these murderers down.
Yes. I was interested in being in that movie and in any movie that would give me a variety of things to play, because I hate to be pigeonholed the way they do in California. If you're in a situation comedy, you're a comedian the rest of your life. If you're in a dramatic piece and you do well in that, you never get to play comedy. Yeah. They say, well, he can't play that. So what I was trying to show, that I had some kind of versatility as an actor. In Cold Blood gave me an opportunity to do that. It was, as you know, a monumentally compelling drama.
Hey, Al, when did we get a better home? Why were the men killed in the basement?
I'm talking facts, not theories. It happened around 2 a.m. All four were apparently killed by the same weapon, a shotgun, 12 gauge. Mr. Flutter's throat was cut.
Before he was shot?
Probably. All four were tied with the same nylon sash cord sold in most hardware stores. Their mouths were taped.
How were they tied? What kind of knots? Oh, can we see police pictures? Find the murder weapon?
Not yet.
Any clues or fingerprints?
Well, all belong to the family.
They say that Nancy's boyfriend is a prime suspect.
Is that what they say?
Well, he was the last one to see him alive.
Except the killers.
It was so good that Truman Capote came on the set one time, and as aggressive as Truman Capote was about his work, he never changed a comma of the thing after Richard Brooks had written it, which was a great tribute to Brooks. Because very, very often a writer who does as successfully as Truman Capote did in the book arena, and when it does get transcribed into film terms, they get a little upset about it. I'm sure he was not very happy about Breakfast at Tiffany's, but he was enormously happy about In Cold Blood.
Talking about not being pigeonholed, you were in a movie with Al Pacino, where you played a judge, and he winds up with some pictures that have you in like stockings and a garter belt, and there's a naked woman, and...
Oh, yes. It was called And Justice for All. And it was another one of those opportunities to work with a wonderful director, Norman Jewison, and in a different kind of a thing.
There you have it. It's the head of the Ethics Committee, Judge Fleming, and the hooker.
Where'd you get these? I've been carrying them around for a couple of days. I'd like to know what they mean. I see the wheel spinning. Sex photo, sex crime. Is he guilty? Is he? Yes.
When you play a bad man, if you sugarcoat it by having a Fred McMurray or a Bill Holden or a guy like me who's played all the, what I call smiling Jack parts, all the nice guy parts, he is a bad man, but the audience doesn't know it until the end of the picture. It makes it a very, very telling kind of thing. The audience hates you more than they would hate ordinarily.
Like McMurray in Double Indemnity.
Exactly, yes. So and I was very good in the part. I'm a good bad man.
And you told one of our producers that you thought that playing that role with Pacino in Justice for All led to the Blake Carrington part in Dynasty.
Exactly.
How so?
Well, there was another case. They said, well, John Forsyth, he's a good actor, but he's a light comedian, isn't he? And they said, and they brought forth the picture for the producers, my agents did, for them to see, and they were overwhelmed with the fact that I could do dramatic stuff. When in reality, I've been a member of the Actors Studio. I've done Arthur Miller's plays on Broadway. It's ludicrous to be pigeonholed in that fashion. So I think one actor may have a facility for more of one thing than another, but a good actor can really generally do both, comedy and drama.
Now, in your new TV show, The Powers That Be, which is a Norman Lear show, you play this senator guy, and this show has received generally very good reviews. I think Tom Shales was kind of wishy-washy about it in the Washington Post, but for the most part, the reviews have been good. And a lot of people think that that your senator is more or less modeled after Ronald Reagan, and the wife is Nancy.
I don't think so. I think I, for one, I tell you, patterned this guy on a lot of senators and politicians that I'd known. For example, during the Kennedy administration, I did a lot of work in Washington. I did a lot of USIA work, United States Information Agency work, narrating things and acting in their things. And I was invited by Ed Morrow, who was the head of USIA at that time, to various parties. So I could pretty much observe all these guys at their work and at their play. And the man that I play on Powers That Be is pretty representative of all politicians, with some notable exceptions, of course.
Well, in the first episode that I saw, there was a little tilt of the head thing and a little kind of almost a will, you know? There was almost a Reagan thing there.
I do that myself, you know?
Do that little shuffle you do, the toss of your head, the non-answer. Senator, there's a rumor you might run for the presidency in '92.
Well, now, I don't know.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob. Pleasure being with you.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye, Angel.